As always, we begin with a few housekeeping items. First, please make sure you're muted to eliminate disruption during this morning's program. We hope you are all free from distractions as some of us still work from home and we know how things can happen in this new way of doing business. We ask that all questions be sent through the chat feature on the bottom of your screen, and we will address those during our open session. Because this program is being recorded, a copy of this program is available after the program. The diversity series is designed to be a town hall style format. We have asked our keynote speaker, Mr. Tony Thompson with Kwame Building Group, to share some thoughts on this topic. And if you know Tony, I'm sure he's got something very interesting prepared for us. Kelly and I will help to monitor questions for those who raise their hand to speak and call you by name. Please take the time now to edit your names to provide your first and last name and the company you represent. This will help us to identify you today as we call your name. Since this is a member-only event, as a reminder, we are a community of design and construction industry professionals with a common interest in the betterment of our region. Our planning committee has identified 4 key pillars for our organization. Those 4 pillars are innovation, continuing education, equity empowerment, and all-inclusive workforce collaboration. I would like to acknowledge our Diversity Advancement Subcommittee for their support and help with developing our Diversity Series events, as well as our Diversity Workshop in November. Our chair is Jane McGowan with Elasticell. Our Diversity Committee chair is Julie Ledbetter with Washington University. And our co-chair is Jeannie Brewster with Certified Now. We always seek our evaluations at the conclusion of each program. So please take a couple of minutes to answer a few quick questions. The evaluations and comments are used to prepare for future programming, as well as determine the overall value of our education and networking programs for the year. We do take all evaluations seriously and always hope to improve on our programs. Your support is important, and it only takes a few minutes for your time to respond. As always, we have a packed calendar designed to meet needs of our full membership. We are sure you will find program and events, and you will want to mark on your calendar. In March, we have a project tour at Green Street Properties and Barkay on March 10th at 4 p.m. All is welcome. On March 17th, we have a virtual program, Rethinking the Construction Supply Chain, which is very vital these days, right? Collaborative Materials Management Strategies for the Built Environment. This is a program topic you will want to be sure to register for. If you can't make this date, we are recording the program as normal and will provide you with a link to the recording for you to view at a later date. On April 14th, the Emerging Leaders are hosting another networking event. And of course, on May 2nd is our golf tournament. So registration is currently open, and typically it sells out. So please, and sponsorships are available so please check in with the council office and get your registration and come out and join us. So before our program begins, we want to take the time to give special recognition to our annual training and education program sponsors. Our annual platinum sponsors, Cosney Wagner. We appreciate their top tier support each year. Our gold sponsors are McGrath and Associates, Ross and Barzini, Kwame Building Group, and L. Keatley. And our silver sponsors are Farnsworth Group, Kaiser Electric, JF Electric, Abney Engineering, OWH Architects, Custom Engineering, and Hush Blackwell. So thank you all for your sponsors. It is very important, and we're able to continue things because of our sponsors and have good programming. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Mr. Tony Thompson. Any of you that signed on earlier know that Tony and I go back a long ways. I had to remind him of something this morning. And so I'm pleased to do this. Tony is the chairman, CEO of Kwame Building Group. Kwame is the first African-American ESOP in the state of Missouri and was founded in 1991. Its headquarters is in St. Louis, and a construction management, program management firm serving as an independent agent to owners. Kwame provides project management, scheduling, estimating, contract, claims administration, document controls, and other services. Give me a few minutes to share with you more about Tony's background. Tony's professional experience includes project engineer at Anheuser-Busch, mechanical engineer at Monsanto, a construction engineer with the U.S. Corps of Engineers. He's earned a Master of Science degree in civil engineering, construction management at Washington University, a Master's of Business Administration degree in finance at Webster, Bachelor of Science degree in architectural engineering, University of Kansas, and a Bachelor of Arts degree in environmental design from University of Kansas. He is involved in the community as the founder of Kwame Foundation, including the Tyrone Thompson Institute of Nonviolence, Regional Business Council, Executive Committee, and K through 12 Committee Chair. He's a trustee of the Webster University, St. Louis Regional Crime Commission, African American Business Leadership Council, Maryville University, and committee member of the SLC3. Now, please welcome Tony Thompson.
Share our video real quick. Get there. It was cute.
Can't hear the sound.
Can't hear it, Kelly.
I didn't see any minority project managers. I didn't see any women project managers all over the country. And that's when I said, okay, it's my niche. The light bulb came on. And I was like, okay, why jump into a field where it's very crowded?
I was always impressed with his enthusiasm, his energy, and the fact that he really was going to make something happen somewhere.
I thought this guy's going to go places. We need to get it on the ground floor. So we used him on what became the first job that Kwame Building Group did.
Kwame was really not about a business. It was about a movement. It was about, mutual respect and family and brotherhood and sisterhood among your coworkers and helping others along the way.
There was a gentleman saw me looking at the building, Dr. Littleton. He came out of the building next door and he said, hey, I see you looking at the building. Are you interested in? I said, well, I hadn't really thought about buying our own building. He goes, well, there's some companies from out of town that are looking to buy that building. But if you're interested, I'll hold it for you. We deal with a lot of large, very high-profile projects. We have a national footprint and have had one for the last 20 plus years.
This is the business that he had envisioned. I mean, the guy had everything figured out.
They are charged with being an extension of my staff, and what their role is to make sure that projects are built on time, on budget, and we get a quality product at the end. And Kwame has done just an outstanding job of, relating with myself and my staff as an extension of staff. He does what he preaches. If you want to see a model of how to make sure you have a diverse workforce, just walk into Tony's office and sometime and you'll just see the way he's got all the right people. His goal is to just go out and find all the right best people to do his work.
Creating the ESOP and selling it 49% to the employees to try to have the legacy carry on. And now we have something that we can point to as an example for other young entrepreneurs and also other African Americans that, yes, it's possible, you can do it.
You know, Tony's interesting because he challenges us all because he says, if I can find diverse personnel, why can't everybody?
Tony's very involved in the Black community and mentoring young people and bringing them in and giving them examples. His business or his volunteerism.
I would be remiss if I did not note that they are the construction manager of the new city soccer stadium. And that is just going to be an iconic stadium. Kwame works with myself and my team every day on the coordination between the city, the owners group, and the new stadium group. And they've just done an outstanding job.
My exact title is operations, but I'm trainer. I'm trying to bring along the next group of the engineers and architects that's with our firm, construction management, to be in the leadership role that I'm fulfilling. So I'm trying to train my predecessors.
This other project I was on is Cardinal Ritter. It was a weight room expansion. And like I said, I went to high school to Cardinal Ritter, so that was just completely full circle. Right now I'm on a convention center project, the St. Louis Convention Center, and it's an honor, honestly, not only for my community, but for the company I work with. And then when my kids grow up, I'm able to show them like, hey, you know, mommy was a part of this project.
I think we're always going to be able to, stay up on the different trends, stay innovative, and build relationships. And if we're doing that, then I don't see why we can't build for another 30 years.
Really reflective, I think, time, 30, that point. And it's also a celebration because in that reflection, you can realize I've done a lot, but also there's still so much potential as well.
This just really is a testimony to his achievement and longevity in his career, and just his magnitude and leadership. I can't think of anyone who's been a greater example of the St. Louis region and community.
We all should be inspired by the growth of the Kwame Building Group. And so I am pleased to say congratulations on your 30th anniversary.
He is really a very special person. The future is very bright for Kwame.
I think it truly speaks volumes of his leadership.
Keep up the good work, Tony. You wake up, you got your head down, shoulder to the wheel, and then before you know it, boom, 30 years has passed. And it's a good feeling. It's kind of mixed, it's good and bad, because if I were to ask you how many minority firms do you know in this industry that have been around 30 years, you probably couldn't count on one hand. But if I were to ask you 15 years ago, who'd still be standing today, Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers, or the Kwame Building Group, you probably wouldn't have said Kwame Building Group.
All right.
All righty.
So,
Tony, you're up.
well, thank you. So, well, first of all, I appreciate that. I don't know if my screen is shared yet, but that's not a big deal. I just want to let you all know, first and foremost, now that I got your attention with the title, I want to go through my experiences basically primarily and to share with you some things. I had a few points that I wanted to cover. When I talk about the insignificance of minorities, I was primarily speaking about Black and African Americans, although it has been a trend for other minorities. But as an African American man, I'd be remiss if I didn't focus my concern about Black people. And if you look at what's happening, and they say that the true measure of a man, Martin Luther King pointed out, is not where he stands in time of comfort and convenience, but where he stands in times of challenge and controversy. Where if you look at the challenges that most African American businesses are faced with, I mean, there are numerous, but the two I want to just point out and how I tried to deal with some of these challenges. First and foremost, cash flow. It doesn't matter how many contracts a person receives or gets, but the cash flow is going to be really significant. And some of the non-minority business owners on here may say, well, cash flow is a challenge for everybody, right? Every business. That's true. However, the access to capital, line of credits, term and various loans are much more difficult and challenging for Black businesses than other businesses. So that is a major concern and impediment to the growth of most African-American businesses. One of the other challenges that we face are perceptions primarily, and that perception has to do with being qualified or productivity or being less than or less educated. And so we have to overcome some of those items. So the biggest challenge that we have to face and the things that we have to do as African-American and small businesses, minority businesses, is make sure that we have qualified and credible candidates. Cash flow, people will tell you who've been with my organization any length of time. There were times when I had to borrow money from my grandmother to make payroll, but I believed in so much of what I was doing, and she believed in me to the extent that there was no problem loaning the money and me paying the money back. But that got me into a position to have staying power. And there's so many African-American businesses that give up perhaps too soon, because help may be right around the corner, but those challenges are real and they're present. Controversially, there's a lot of controversy that center around African-American businesses that basically engulf us. Primarily, the controversy centered around credibility and experience. Once again, if I were to ask you again, 15 years ago, you wouldn't have very many Black-owned businesses in this industry with 20 years experience. So when we go after projects, we have to compete based on our experience, based on our education and so forth. Well, we're pleased to say now, 30 years later, I have individuals with my organization that have been here 27 years, who worked at Monsanto and some major Fortune 1 and 500 companies who have come to our organization. And most times we find ourselves having more experience than either the owners that we're representing or even the partners that we're partnered with. But the challenge is nothing beats experience. And unless we're placed and put in position to gain that experience, we're often going to be at a disadvantage. And so the other controversial item that stares us in the face every day is the whole affirmative action DBE and MBE program. Since I signed up for this presentation, we've seen around the country various moves to start to dismantle the affirmative action program, the DBE programs, the MBE program. I testified on Capitol Hill a few years ago when they were trying to remove the affirmative action program for Compto, a transportation organization, invited me to speak in front of Congress on that very issue. And if you were to look at the opportunities and relationships and the contribution that African-American businesses have made to our society and to this community, it would be hard pressed to argue that affirmative action and some of these DB and MB programs have assisted firms from getting into the program. But what we have to be careful of is not to make it an impediment, because what happens is, as minority-owned businesses, we have to spend time, money, and effort to get certified as a minority-owned business that our white counterparts do not have to do. And so the elephant in the room, I said, is Black. Sometimes we want to ignore the fact that, and I'm sure everyone on this call have been experienced or have had an experience where there was an African-American person in their organization that had a great idea at the table, and it was kind of dismissed or kind of ignored it a little bit, only to come full circle when someone else, basically a white male, had the same idea or the same issue that was brought forth, and it was implemented and executed, and it was moved very quickly. Same thing with leadership. I've been in situations where I've taken, when I worked in corporate America, subordinates to to sales calls and meetings with me or presentations. I've gone to presentations or to present in Newark, New Jersey, for example, walking into the lobby and the receptionist asked if I was making a delivery, or if the person that was with me, all the questions were geared towards this individual when I was. So even when we're in leadership positions, sometimes unless it's emphasized, we have a problem acknowledging and recognizing and actually moving forward with those suggestions that the leaders make. I have several examples on major projects when oftentimes when the ownership group doesn't recognize the contributions made by the African Americans, sometimes those projects tend to falter or have problems. I had a situation where a good friend of mine, I'm not gonna call his name, he shared with me some information about a particular project. He said, your client needs to know that there is some unforeseen or hidden conditions that they need to be aware of. At my very first meeting with the team, I raised that point. It was dismissed, they ignored it. They said, we already got that covered, because it was a major design firm that was saying this. And little old Kwame was saying, no, you really need to look at this. This could be a potential problem. I got from a good source, and I even shared with him who the source was. It was ignored. Fast forward months later, cost that client $20 million to repair.
You're going bye-bye?
That was presented.
Oh,
Oh, okay. And so I just want to make sure that we actually understand that even to the Black business on the call, always respect and appreciate the value that you bring to your partners. The true value add is sometimes a good example is quick pay. If you have a majority firm with a $20 million contract and they've given up 25% to minority businesses, well, what happens in most cases is that quick pay that sometimes clients want to put into place in order to help those minority businesses continue their cash flow. Well, as I stated earlier, cash flow is important for everyone, not just the minority businesses. And so that quick pay, if the minority firm's first invoice is 25% of let's say that $1 million on that first piece, but they get paid in 7 days, well, who's going to benefit most? The majority firm is going to get paid in 7 days, the bulk of that $1 million to that 25,000 or 250,000 or whatever the case may be for the minority firm. So that's an advantage that sometimes MBE/DB firms bring to majority firms that often goes ignored. I think that I had a little chart here that I wanted to share that before I get too deep into that. And here's an example. Now, can everybody see the screen? I wasn't sure if my screen was being shared or not, Kelly.
no, it's not being shared. You just have to hit the share button on the bottom.
Okay, the ball is in my court. Okay. Let me see how to do this. Okay. Oh. All right. This one right here. Good. All right. So if you look at get back here. Thought I had rehearsed this. Screwed it up. So this is I found this and I thought it was interesting and I wanted to share with you all today. And this kind of gives you can replace woman of color in this flow chart to just people of color. And often in the workplace, this happens. With white leadership, sometimes the honeymoon period, the woman of color feels welcome, needed, and happy when she comes through the door. And in some cases, it was a tokenized hire, whatever. So we move forward and the reality sets in. There's repetitive injury and microaggression that starts to occur. The woman of color points out issues within the organization. She tries to work within the organization's structure and policies. She pushes for accountability. And as you part, the response becomes an organization denies or ignores and then begins to blame. There's denial of racism. The responsibility of fixing the problem is placed on the woman or of color or the person of color. The people of color are pitted against one another. Then there's targeted attacks. And in the retaliation, the organization decides that the woman of color is the problem and targets her. The organization labels the conflict as a communication issue or claims that she is not qualified or not a good fit, and then a woman or person of color exits the organization. And I think there are a lot of people on this call that have experienced this. And this is something that we have to be conscious of if we are really sincere about changing the trajectory of dealing with African-American in business. And this chart right here, some of my close friends have seen this chart. If you look at the horizontal line, it could be basically the number of years in business, 5, 10, whatever, or it could be revenue, it could be size of the company, it could even be quality for that matter. But if you look at the vertical axis and you start out, say, with 50 small businesses or African-American businesses, the labor statistics points out that the majority of small businesses fail within the first 5 years of operation. Not just minority businesses, all businesses within the first 5 years. That's a stat, that's a statistic, that's the fact. One of the things our government does better than anything is studies. So we're going to take that as the gospel, right? So if you go to that last quadrant where I call them exemplary firms, we take an organization like Dave Stewart, right? There's one of them in the world, but the point is there are very few exemplary firms that get out there and really grow and are doing things in a prime and very significant way. But you go to the first quadrant there where I look at the first 5 years, those are what I call startups and knuckleheads. See, these are some people that probably shouldn't even be in business to start with. But I'm not suggesting that we not have or help startups. But what happens is we know that within that first 5 years of operation, it will probably drop off to in an area of 4 or 5 firms. So the problem is the greatest opportunity for success is to work with those firms who have demonstrated they have the capacity and capability of being in business. They've made it through that tough period of time. I'm sure there are a lot of firms that have given up or stopped right before they have reached that critical point where they've demonstrated they have the staying power, the capacity, but just stop fighting. They just get tired of all the fighting and everything that it takes to stay in business. But the majority of firms, some of them know this, they recognize this. So if an owner says we want 25% participation on a project and they go out and get 5 minority firms and give them each 4%, you can't grow a business off 4%. But they check the box. The owner organization recognizes that they've met the 25% goal that they set out. But what happens is the majority of those firms, particularly if they're startups, will be out of business within that first 5 years. So if you're sincere about growing businesses, ideally, we'd like to have more small business and minorities to start out. We'd like for them to last. But more importantly, they need an opportunity after that 5-year period of that growth stage to have opportunities to grow, to get more business, the more significant business to be able to grow their firm. So that ideally, you'd like to have more of those majority firms to help develop these individuals to become prime and proceed and move on to be prime contractors and consultants on projects. And so one of the things that we tried to do very early on is I started out, I had to take advantage of being a minority. It was a culture shock to me, leaving Anheuser-Busch, leaving Monsanto, leaving corporate America, all of a sudden have to fill out all this paper to get determined and certified as a minority business. And then all of a sudden to be classified at a disadvantaged business. I'm like, there's nothing disadvantaged about me. I went to the best schools, I worked for the best companies, so this system put me at a disadvantage by creating this stigma of being now who wants to create a champion baseball team where you're going to compete where 25 of your team are disadvantaged, but you got to go and compete with everyone else. So you put a stigma on small businesses, minority-owned firms that really is unfair, and we're constantly fighting that stigma. And so by being joint venture partners is where I had to learn how to be a leader. By being at the table with the joint venture partners, I got to see their resumes compared to my employee resumes, the salaries that they were paying their staff compared to the salaries I was paying my staff. I got to sit at the table when we're negotiating the contract. Well, when you're a sub, you typically don't have that direct communication with the prime. But when you're a joint venture partner, if it's structured properly, you're at the table with the client. And that's how you learn. As African Americans in this world, in this business, we're pups, we're babies when it comes to being in leadership of major projects and corporations compared to our white counterparts. So we're in a race that we're trying to catch up on, and we're really, and so sometimes I think we're too hard on ourselves as African American businesses. We haven't been in this game long enough to really have that issue, but we want it now, and we deserve it. So it's like I said, you got to crawl before you walk, but as soon as you're able to walk, you need to start running. You don't want to get up, start walking and say, this walking thing's for the birds. Let me get back on my knees and crawl a little longer. No, we need to get up there and we need to go and work as fast as we possibly can to catch up, to make up for all the lost time. I talked a little bit about navigating the political minefields. Well, we have to stay involved. Politics in everything we do. Senior Congressman Clayton once said that if a person has political clout or economic clout, people respect them. If they have neither political or economic clout, they oppress them. If they have both, they fear them. And most of the time, African American businesses have neither. We're new to the political game, but we're starting to have elected Black mayors, Black congressmen, senators, so forth. So we're starting to have a little political respect, so forth. But we're still at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to economic, clout. And so we're often playing this game, but you need to use that relationship, not necessarily to get you anything. And this is a mistake that I think people make. See, in the white business community, what I've seen over the last 30 years, they can help influence policies and legislature and statutes. There was a major business owner here in the St. Louis market that, if people recall, a few years ago, lobbied very heavily, and he had strong support in state capital to create what they called a super TIF. It's never been done before, and now it's a super TIF for this individual. Well, most minority firms, we can't afford to have a lobbyist full-time in Jeff City or in DC for that matter. But decisions are made, and we have to play the game. We have to be able to participate. But at the same time, when outside forces bring parties together, if you take two books and you try to hold them together, you got outside forces like affirmative action or MBE programs or politics or whatever it is that are holding these two forces together, these two organizations. Well, when those outside forces go away, that partnership falls apart. But if you put glue between those two pieces of those two books, those forces, and you push it together, once those two forces go away, that glue is a metaphor for value. Once those forces go away, that relationship stays together. We as African American and Black businesses, small businesses, woman-owned businesses, must make sure that we bring value to our partners. And if we bring that value, regardless of what the outside forces are saying or doing, we should still be able to do business together as we move forward. And the last point I want to make about how do you measure that progress? And I think what happens, for at least for me, I didn't think 30 years ago that I'd still be here 30 years later. I wasn't thinking about 30 years ahead. I have people who retired. I have some really talented people who passed away. So, it's a constant change. And as an African-American business owner, this succession to the next 30-year next generation is a challenge. A lot of our white counterparts have gone through those generational changes, succession. It's new for us, and it's a little cumbersome. But measuring progress is kind of like Malcolm X once said: if you put a 9-inch blade in my back and you pull it out 3 inches, you can't call that progress. So what's happened is we've made a little progress in our society, but it's not nearly enough to really brag about the progress that's being made as it relates to African American and Black-owned business in this society. And the last point I want to make before I open up for Q&A is that if you look at the wealth gap, it's been documented, and we know that the wealth gap is widening between Blacks and white Americans to the tune of like, 22,000 compared to, well, actually, it's more like 16,000 compared to 163,000 for white families, black versus white. I mean, that's a huge gap. Now, there's a gap between Hispanic and whites too, but it's more like 22,000 versus 163, about 7 times versus 11 times. So what are we going to do about that? That generational wealth gap has also widened. So we have to create opportunities. And if we're going to be successful as a nation, if we're going to compete on a global scale, I've said this after coming back from Shanghai, and I noticed how big and how many people. I mean, China can throw rocks and kick our ass, you know. But it's just so many. As in America, we can't really be competitive against the rest of the world if we don't provide a quality access of education to all of our people. But when you have a disparity among education, you have a disparity among wealth, you have a disparity among jobs, we are not going to be able to be competitive against the rest of the world. There's just not enough white people to compete against China and everyone else by themselves. So with that, I'll just open it up for the question. Everything was so clearly presented, no questions arose?
I'm getting there. So yes, you definitely have some questions. First, let me pull back on this. Brian Holscher has asked, Tony, are your experiences throughout the country significantly different from your experiences here in the St. Louis area?
Oh, that's a good question. Significantly different? I wouldn't say significant, but there is a difference. You know, in Seattle, we've been more welcomed in certain areas of the country. And if you look at those areas where we have been welcomed, like Florida, we had a joint venture and we worked on various airport expansions, community college expansions, as joint venture partners in Florida for like 10 years. And we've been in Seattle for about 10 years. And I think most of those areas are very diverse, where they have this, it's not just black or white. They have a huge melting pot of diverse minorities. So it's like there's not a concentrated effort to keep blacks out. Unfortunately, in the St. Louis market, it's either black or white. It's a very small percentage of other, although the Hispanic population is growing and rightfully so. But if you look at all the disparity studies that have been done, the disparity studies have pointed out where the disparities were, and they based it on capability and capacity, which is why the goals have continued to hover in the 20+% for African-American businesses, considerably less for others, but they still exist. Well, we're often not meeting the goals when it comes to African-American businesses in our community. We've exceeded the goals in most cases for women and even Hispanic and Asian business, believe it or not. The goals are smaller, of course, but we've exceeded them. Based on those studies, we already know why is that. The question is, why is that happening? And if we, again, if what's happening in our industry is any different than what's happening throughout the nation, it's clear that it's racism. And it's clear that there's an insignificance that they're looking at African-American as, you know, there are other sources that can be utilized to a greater extent and have been utilized to a greater extent than African-Americans in this country, in this state in particular.
I'm looking at the next question. So this is from Ron Unreiner. As CM on some of the major projects in our marketplace, what influence can your firm have on the payment practices of owners? Also, what do you consider a good payment policy from owner to GC?
That's a good question, and we've had significant influence when we're the prime, you know. And I mentioned a little bit about quick pay. You see, and I'm, you know, so some people may not like this. My position is, when you decide that you want to get into this business, you want to get into this game, it's a knockdown, drag out game. I mentioned earlier on where I had to borrow money from my grandmother to make payroll when I first started my company, that first third year. And this was a challenge that I knew was going to exist that I had to prepare myself for. Now, as banks start to open up to lines of credits and the term loans and everything else, then I want to be able to compete on the same level as the majority firms compete. So to answer that question, a 30-day net pay cycle is not an unreasonable pay cycle if everybody adheres to it. The problem is some owners don't pay in 30 days. The prime contractors don't pay their subs in 30 days. When it falls off like that, it creates a problem for the small business who is struggling most for cash flow. So if everyone is fair, you don't have to do anything different. But if you're not going to be fair, or if you know you have a contractor who has a history of not paying their minority subs in a timely manner, if you know you have a client who has a history of not paying in a reasonable 30-day period of time, then yes, then maybe we should change things and we will influence that they improve the pay cycle to 7 days, 12 days. And we've been successful in doing so, even joint checks and things of that nature. But what happens is I do not want to create a situation where people feel like we have to make concessions to do business with Black folks. We got to pay more to do business with Blacks. We have to do this to do that. That is simply not true. Most of the Blacks on this team can tell you, and I can tell you for myself, that oftentimes we will take a bath to get in certain deals. We will eat certain costs to be in certain deals. Sometimes we will lose money to be in certain deals. And as an owner's rep, where I've seen the pay and I've seen the invoices and the structure, I can tell you that there are times when majority firms, whether they're prime consultants or whether they're contractors, have asked for premiums because of the goals of participation. And so the owners have to make a decision. Do I want to be a good corporate citizen and client and pay this premium to have minority participation, or do I want to just look at my bottom line and say, no, we're not going to pay that premium to have a minority participation? 9 times out of 10 in this town, they'll pay the premium because they are sincere about it. But what they're not doing is digging deeper and diving in to find out, why are we paying a premium to hire these minorities on this project? Because I've seen that money rarely flows or trickles down to the minority firm. Sometimes that money stays with the majority firm as an insurance to protect themselves or something, this boogeyman that they have not seen yet. These ghosts that they say are out there, that this company may or may not go out of business, or I need this money because I gotta handle a lot of the back of the house stuff for them, so I gotta pay extra to have these minority women on my project. It's not always true. It's not the case. If that is the case, why are you doing business with them in the first place?
That. Okay, so Sabrina has said, I get so frustrated as a minority woman in construction, and then occasionally someone says to have hope because we have come a long way, but statistics say we really haven't. Where do you stand on this perspective, and what is the thing that gives you hope and keeps you going?
Well, I think I answered that question in my 9-inch blade scenario. I agree with her 100%. We are nowhere near where we should be or where we need to be. But I do like to say, yeah, progress is progress. And we should also celebrate that. And there are some organizations, and I'd be remiss if I didn't point out the fact that MSD, for example, Brian Hosher, who asked that question earlier, they probably have one of the best minority programs in the area. They're sincere about it. They put money where their mouth is. They provided training for minorities for certain disciplines that they know are lacking in the sewer district system. If owners want to really be serious about their inclusion programs, they should go talk to Brian Hosher over at MSD and Shauna Parodies. But it is frustrating to say, hey, just be patient and wait. Be patient for what? It's like I said, once you're up and you crawled before you walk, but once you're walking, then don't tell me I should not run. If I can walk, I can run. If I can get up to that point, then I need to be able to have the same access and the same opportunity as my majority counterpart. Now, I like to say that let the service dictate the percentage, not the percentage dictate the service. If what I bring to the table is only worth 4%, then I only want 4%. But don't try to force me to do 25% because that's what your goals say. and I can only do 4%. You're setting me up to fail. You're going to piss off all those other people who could have done that work instead of me. But if I can do 60% of that work, then I want 60% of the work. But it's all, we have to be fair about what it is. When I've been in joint ventures, when we're looking at staffing the team, we put the resumes on the table. Let's pick the best person for this particular position to be on this project. If my guy is the best guy, then my guy is going to be the project manager. If he's not, then he can be the deputy or he can be a project engineer. I don't have a problem with that. But I do have a problem with you putting a white male at the head of the project when my Black female has more experience. That's a problem.
The buyers of construction services in other cities have the same unworkable payment policies on their major commercial projects as the owners now practice in the St. Louis marketplace.
Say that again.
So this is from Ron on Reiner, so if he wants to rephrase it, speak up, feel free, Ron. Do the buyers of construction services in other cities have the same unworkable payment policies on the major commercial projects as the owners now practice in the St. Louis marketplace?
So you need to define for me what unworkable, what does he mean by that?
So Ron, do you want to speak up on that question?
Well, certainly unworkable is defined different by everybody, but in my working with minority contractors, I think 30 days is unworkable for a third tier minority contractor, but I seem to be in the minority on that. But my concern, Tony, is I'm wondering if in other cities, do they pay? We have many owners in this town that will have 45, 60, 90, even 120-day payment policies. Do you find that in other cities as well, or are we just following a trend? Or St. Louis is never a trendsetter, so I'm just wondering what your experience is in other cities.
No, okay, good. I understand now. I think St. Louis is a little bit behind the curve, a little unreasonable, because I don't think in other cities that we've been in, I can't think of one of my clients in the other cities that have held us out there for 90 to 100 some days. I can't think of one. And to that point, I had a project, and I'm not going to name the client, but where we were owed $300,000 for a year, an entire year. And I've had subs on my project, on my team, that I paid while we were waiting to get paid. And they even told me that they would have been out of business if that had happened to them. And sometimes, again, I don't believe in conspiracy theories, but sometimes you got to think, why is this happening to the Black company when no one else has experienced that? And I had to use every relationship that I had, to make sure I got paid, and I end up getting paid. But that was a tough period. And yes, I think that there are some things that are a little unreasonable in this market that do not exist in other markets.
So here's the next one. You have lots of questions coming, Tony. I knew this would happen. I told you. Okay, Tony, I have worked with DB firms across the country, and one thing always stands out with Kwame, that is the number of minority employees in your company. How can we encourage other companies owned by people of color to follow your model?
Well, first of all, you would have to be born to a mother named Betty Thompson. But since you didn't have that, because she basically stated that none of us have made it until all of us have made it. And I live by that philosophy. I believe that I would be remiss if I didn't make sure I created opportunities for people like me. As a matter of fact, when I started my business, I was primarily starting that business to create opportunities for African Americans that did not exist in this industry. Because when I traveled around the country with Anheuser-Busch, I did not see any Black project managers. I did not see any female project managers. And so I just felt like it was ridiculous, and it was time, particularly when I knew a lot of engineers that went to college and got engineering degrees from Rolla and WashU and all these other great institutions, Purdue, they deserve the same opportunity as their white counterparts, and not to be on a project working for a guy who had a history degree when he had an engineering degree and a professional engineering license. Well, what happens to minority firms, if I can't create some really significant opportunities for them here, they're going to leave. So I had to be very proactive about going after projects as the prime. And as if you probably noticed, 80% or so of our projects now, we're the prime. We're not a sub. We lose more than we win, but when we win big. And my whole idea is to make sure that I create opportunities for Black folks. If they want to step up to the plate, they come to Kwame and they'll have that opportunity. Now, if they don't handle it, they can't handle it, they'll be gone. But they will be given that opportunity. And so I think that if as an owner, if my only interest was my personal financial gain, then I would probably play that game. But it's not. When I worked at Anheuser-Busch, I could have stayed there in a very comfortable position and been fine. When I left Anheuser-Busch, I didn't make any money the first year I was out here. The second year, I made half of what I made when I worked at Anheuser-Busch. The third year, I made the same amount that I made at Anheuser-Busch. Since then, I would have never made what I made when I worked at Anheuser-Busch. So it was a risk and reward, but it was a chance I was willing to take. But it wasn't about the money is the point I'm trying to make. It was about the freedom. It was about the flexibility. It was about the opportunities that I could create. My foundation has created scholarships where we have provided over $3 million in scholarships for first generation and minority students to go to college. I wouldn't have been able to do it. I wouldn't have been able to do that as an employee for Anheuser-Busch.
Thank you, Tony. Okay, so this one is a comment. Thank you. So it comes from Joy Ballsberry. Thank you for your candor and transparency on the experiences of historically minoritized communities of color and women.
Thank you.
Julie Ledbetter has a question, or I think a statement here. As an industry,
What's up, Julie, how you been?
Julie, you can feel free to say it if you'd like, Ms. Chair. I can read this comment though. As an industry, how can we change our practices to ensure that our capacity building opportunities for smaller companies rather than focusing solely on percentage goals? For example, how can we celebrate the $200,000 job that an emerging company completes successfully on their terms and makes good money over the 2 million job that sucks a lot of the entrepreneur's time without much profit at the end of the day?
I mean, that's a very good question, and that's a very good point. I think that most small businesses that I've noticed, African-American business in particular, that have failed or weren't successful is not because they weren't technically competent. It's because they were not good business people. Now in engineering school, they don't teach you anything about finance. That's why I went back and got my MBA, because I didn't know anything about business. And I think there are a lot of talented people out here who jump out into business without being prepared financially, you know, as far as the understanding. When I mentioned that whole cash flow issue that I had early on when I had to go to my grandmother, it wasn't a surprise. I had a business plan where I knew what was going to happen if I didn't get paid in this certain time frame. I knew I was going to get run into a cash flow crunch. But most people get shocked like a deer in headlights when that happens to them, and they can't recover sometimes when they get themselves to spread out. So, and the point I'm going to make is, Kwame, at one time we had 110 employees. I have 40 employees now. I don't ever want to have 110 employees again. When I had 110 employees, we made the ENR top 100 CM for feed list. We were 3 or 4 rungs below McCarthy on the agency CM side of things. And it was great. But our EBITDA, our net profit at that time was probably 3/4 or a half of what it is now. And our revenue is practically the same or less than it was then. So I focus more on productivity and profitability now as opposed to revenue. To Julie's point, that $200,000 contract may have been more successful, more profitable than that $2 million contract. So it doesn't do us any good to brag about how big we are if we're not profitable. If you look at the top 100 list and the listing in ENR, not ENR, but in the Business Journal, that book list, they list the top construction companies, they list the top architectural firms, they list the top 100 accounting firms, then they list the top 100 minority firms. I don't apply to that stuff anymore. I don't even get into that game because it makes no sense. Because if you look at the top 100 minority firms, you start at the top with Dave Stewart, who's bigger than all the white firms. And then you drop down significantly to the other minority firms in various industries. You're not even comparing industry to industry. So how does that even make sense? What are you doing? What is the point of having a list like that other than show that Dave is an anomaly and the rest of the minority firms are sucking?
Can I ask a follow-up on that? So what can we do as owners and Kwame as construction managers or general contractors on projects to break up the packages to give more minority and women, on your scale, it's more the smaller companies, and as an industry side note, we need to come up with different language. As you said, you want to disadvantage somebody on your team, like emerging companies, or how do we give the small companies an opportunity to compete, to have that opportunity to get a package on these projects when the big guys will go in and take it all day long?
That's another good question. And it really comes down to the owner's will. For example, we've been on various projects with different owners. When we're the owner's rep or the project manager, they allow us that flexibility to make those recommendations and suggestions. What happens, it may be a little more involved from a management standpoint if you have multiple packages, but the money that you pay for the additional management staff is peanuts compared to the increase in productivity and minority participation that you may receive. For example, it may be insignificant to someone to break out an electrical package that involves fixtures and receptacles, or switch plates and whatever. But if you're talking about a 2,000 room hotel, that's a pretty big contract for an electrical contractor who's starting out. And it wouldn't be very taxing for him to come through and put all of the fixtures in, or even the light bulbs for that matter. That could be a $2 million contract. But again, it's the gravy work. And it's the work that most majority firms don't want to give up. But if they're the deep pockets, if they have the bonding capacity, if they have the loans, they have the line of credit, if they're the big boys, then give it up. The problem is not that we don't have capacity in the Black community. The problem is most of the majority firms are not willing to give up anything. They have to be willing to give up. So if you want to share, share. The challenge for me as a project management company is that most of the time when we go to some of these organizations, they say, we do all the project management in-house, so we don't need any help. Well, wait a minute. That goes against the whole principle. If you're trying to include participation and inclusion on the construction side, why wouldn't you have inclusion and participation on the management side, or the accounting, or the legal, or whatever? It should be from top to bottom. If we're talking about inclusion, why are we limiting it to a pickup truck and a wheelbarrow? Why is it that when there's construction, the first thing we want to look at is minority firms for the demolition and the hauling? Yes, there are a lot of them out there, but there are a lot of other minority firms that are emerging who would like to take on bigger and bolder and get involved with other projects. But sometimes the majority firms push back from having to give up certain things. The owner has to push back at them and say, no, this is how we're going to do it. And that will create opportunities for minority firms to grow. I hope that was helpful, but that's, in some projects where we've done that,
thank you.
it has worked.
Thank you, Tony. Okay, Anika Porter has said, your leadership means so much to minority firms. Thank you. What advice would you give minority firms to increase capacity?
I'm sorry, I missed that. I got a message that came in from one of the participants here, but could you say that again? I'm sorry.
Of course. Anika Porter has said, your leadership means so much to minority firms. Thank you. What advice would you give minority firms to increase capacity?
Oh, that's a good question, and I think that organizations out there who there are very good minority-owned training, marketing, motivational organizations out there, and I think that minority firms really need to spend more time and money. Again, I don't want to be preachy because I make plenty of mistakes. So please forgive me, my Black brothers and sisters out there, if I sound presumptuous or condescending. That's not my intention. I can only speak to what I've had to do and what I've done. And what I've done is I try to spend a lot of money. I have tuition reimbursement. I have what I call the Kwame Academy. I have a boot camp that I personally teach and train. I really believe in training. I mean, we really just have to do that. If I was blessed and fortunate to have worked in some major corporations like Monsanto, like the Corps of Engineers, like Anheuser-Busch, and I took advantage of the training that they gave their employees. And I tried to share that with my company. I tell people all the time that Kwame is a big company in a little company's body. At the end of the day, we're still a small business, but we don't have to look like it or act like it. I try to bring that same quality and procedure and policies and processes to my company. It's a little challenging sometimes to have that red tape in a small organization, but you have to do it or things will get out of control real fast. And so I think that by making sure that you cross-train, this whole COVID thing has done something that I'm sure a lot of people were not ready for, but cross-training is important. I'm not a big fan of remote anything, but we have to deal with it. But I think that it forces you to look at your processes and procedures to become more efficient and to make sure that you have multiple people capable of providing various services so you can do more with less. And I just think that that's something that the minority firms have to really look at, is their staff and investing that money into the people.
Thank you, Tony. Stacy has a comment, Stacy Fowler with the SLDC. Prime's paying a higher cost on jobs could be broken down, and the Prime has the ability to help MWB lower some of that cost by allowing the MWB to buy materials and supply at their cost. Any comments to that?
That is true. I mean, I think that, and we've had one thing I have to give a shout out to LQ, the organization. They have made offers to allow minority firms on the stadium project, for example, to use some of their suppliers to purchase some of their materials at their cost. I don't know how many have taken advantage of that, but I know that that was something that was extended and offered to them. As we all know that, again, statistically speaking, minority firms pay higher interest rate on loans and higher interest rate on materials if they can even get access to certain materials and terms. But the majority firms, since they are the prime for a reason, they're the prime because they have the financial capacity, they have the experience, they have the bonding capacity. If they have all of that, why are we letting them off the hook for them to not have to do anything? Where is the risk? Now, this is a well-known fact. Well, it's a fact. It's not, I don't know how known it is, but a lot of private institutions in this town allow a lot of prime contractors to do work in their institution without putting up a bond. But they make the minority firms that those organizations request as a goal to put up a bond. So if I'm a minority firm and my bonding capacity is only $4 or $5 million, and if I'm doing work on any government agency or city agency that requires me to put up a bond, 9 times out of 10, my capacity is tapped if I'm doing any significant amount of work. But if I want to do work in the private sector and I'm forced to put up a bond, I don't have it because I'm working on places that require me. Where the majority firm has excess capacity for public sector work, because there are private sector clients that don't make them put up a bond. How is that fair? You know, and that's like belt and suspenders anyway. If the prime firm has a bond and he's a deep pocket person, why make that minority sub put up a bond at all on private sector work? Yes, I said at all. If the majority firm has the bonding capacity and the deep pockets, and you have the confidence in those individuals, why make the minority firm that you have already vetted 10 times up and down, why you make it put up a bond at all?
Can I add one more thing? So
Yeah.
I know I gave that as an example, Tony, but is there anything else that primes can do to help lower cost when, you know, you're bidding and you're negotiating, you're looking at and you're saying, I can't go with them because their price is too high? I heard you just talk about the bonding, but is there any other area that we should be talking about that with primes when we're, especially from my perspective, when I'm working with them on trying to meet goals and be able to make sure they have participation on various scopes? Is there some other things that maybe we should be having conversations about?
Well, yes, one of the things you can have the conversation about is verifying if that is in fact true. Is it true that that minority firm's bid is in fact too high? I've had scenarios where I've been told that, well, we didn't go with this minority firm because their numbers were too high, only to find out during my investigation that the minority firm's number was the same number as the majority firm, that the sub that they utilized, but they were told, or they were given us a higher number for that minority firm. Now, I'm not saying everyone does that, but games are being played. Now, let's play devil advocate for a moment. If I'm a majority firm, I'm going to take the majority firm side for a moment. I'm a majority firm. I've been in business 100 years. I got subcontractors that I've worked with. These are quality guys. Some may be my cousins, but these are quality guys that do great work. And now you're telling me I have to get rid of my cousin and give 25% of this work to some knucklehead that I don't even know, just under disguise of participation. Now I'm pissed off. I don't want to do it, but if I'm going to do it, you're going to pay me to do it. You know, that's the reality of life. And if I'm that majority firm, it makes sense. Why would I want to give up someone that I know is going to do the job instead of taking a chance on someone that I don't know? This is where the owners have to come in. The owners have to come in and say, you know, I understand all of that. These are taxpayer dollars that are going on this, or we want to be a good corporate client. Then you need to go back and talk to that minority firm and see if they're willing to come down on their price. Because if they can, they will. If they can't, then they don't want the business. But sometimes we don't even get a second bite of the apple. And sometimes that number that was given up front wasn't a legitimate number to begin with.
So Steve Faust has the next question. As a majority subcontractor, what is the number one thing we can do to grow our minority partners?
That's a good question. And what I say to all the people all the time, minority firms need the same thing that majority firms need. That's more work, more business. What you can do is if you got minority firms that you do business with, that you enjoy, that you like, you have a relationship, then you continue to work with them. Now, obviously, you don't want to give them more than they can chew. You don't want to, run them out of business by giving them more capacity. If they're smart, they won't bite off more than they can chew. But minority firms don't need more loans. They need more business. And if they get paid for the business that they have, they will survive. But if they get business and they're strung out 90, 120, days. So to answer the question, get more business, pay them in a timely manner, and check in on them to make sure that they're not biting off more than they can chew. And I think you'll see them grow.
So I have one before we get to Heather's question. I think this goes back to your comment in your theory on the racism comment. So I guess the question really is, what are some of your thoughts as far as the changes that have been made? You've been around several generations. We have really 3 key generations to work with in our workforce right now. What changes have you seen? And as far as, someone referenced hope, I'm not sure who that was. I guess we all have some hope. We're in this to have these discussions, to have some hope that racism does change. So I guess what I'd like to hear from you is, what have you seen as far as change? What have you seen as far as the generational differences? We've all heard how truly different from a baby boomer to the Gen X to the millennials, and now the Z generations entering our workforce. So that's really our fourth. What do you say about that? I'm curious.
Well, the first observation is not very good. So I do think from the baby boomers to the Z generation X, and I'm sure most of us on here who are in that generation, I hate to stereotype in any circumstance, because I was the young kid on the block when I first jumped out there in the business. And now I'm one of the senior guys, when I go to these meetings. But I do see, and I see Rosalind laughing because we went to school together. So basically, the work ethics, man, it's just different. I mean, the whole, there's no longer this real commitment to a career that you want to go into and develop and grow and stay in for 30 years. I mean, it's just rare. But when you find those individuals who really believe in the career and that's their primary goal, you need to grab hold of them and hold on to them, whatever it takes to keep them engaged. But I do see that there's a change, a shift. I mean, not just among African Americans. If you look at the construction industry, and I think anyone can tell you that, they're aging out, and we don't. It's not as sexy as other industries, and we're just having a harder time recruiting younger people to the construction industry as a whole. And so we really have to do more to be accommodating, to be flexible, to create those opportunities. Now, as it relates to the whole racism piece, now the fact that the doors have been opened considerably more, primarily through the affirmative action, DBE goals and things that have been set and established by organizations, I do believe a lot of institutions are sincere. The problem is we're now becoming competition. Competition is not a bad thing, but we're being considered competitors before we've really grown to the point we have the mass and the number of businesses out here to really be a threat. We're not a threat to the majority in this industry, and yet we're being treated like the threat and not getting the same opportunities sometimes before we can even get off the ground. So I just think that majority firms need to take a deep breath and not worry that the majority firms are not going to take away all of their business, and you don't have to worry about growing your competition. Look at it as a partnership, because once again, if racism wasn't so deeply embedded in this industry, why would you have a situation where you would have, I'm not going to call names, but everybody going to know who they are when I mention the project. If you got 3 of the largest construction companies in the area, if they can come together as a joint venture to do a major project, then why can't you work with some other minority firms to come together to do a project? They certainly could have done it themselves, but they also recognize that 33% of something is better than 100% of nothing. So they came together to go after a major expansion project in this town, and they all shared in it, as opposed to competing against each other, and one of them particularly, or 2 of them potentially losing out. So I think that by looking at minority firms as potential collaborative partners as opposed to competitors is how we can grow. And I think that what I've seen, I started out as a minority firm as providing consulting subcontracting work, grew to being a major sub, to being joint venture partners, to now we've been the prime on the convention center project, for example. Burns & McDonnell is a sub consultant to us. We've had project and program management experiences at the airport where Jacobs was a sub to us. And 15, 20 years ago, It was unheard of that a majority firm that's $1 billion international firm will be a sub to a minority firm. But those are some of the positive gains that I've seen in the industry.
Okay, so Heather, here. Heather Sear, I think it's Sear. You compared the significant experience you gained as a JV partner, or not a joint venture partner, or prime sitting at the table with owners against the common experience for the MBE firms of performing a limited, less profitable scope of work. Understanding that capacity building is so critical to long-term success, how do you feel about the effectiveness of majority firms or owners creating set-aside scopes?
You know, I've often had, this is again my personal opinion, I often have problems with set-asides. I have no problem with goals. I have a problem with set-asides, only to the extent that it doesn't help from a competitive standpoint. And if you set something aside for only minority firms, how, and if they have to compete with each other for that set aside work, if the perception is the majority firms are higher in price, but now you got firms who are perceived as being higher or more costly competing against each other for set aside work, and you end up with that person, are you still getting the best price? You might be getting the best price among the highest price, if that's what you believe. I believe in everyone having a fair chance of competing against everyone else fairly. And that's the trick, fair. The problem is we often don't know when things are being fair. I believe, based on my experience, that a minority firm in this industry competing against majority firm on whatever subcontract scope, whatever it is, they may be high once or twice or 2 or 3 times, but if you continue to give them an opportunity, they'll figure it out and they'll become competitive. But what happens is, if we get brought in to bid on a project and we're high and we don't get that project, the next project comes along, we don't get invited to bid because the perception is we're going to be too high. Now, if you ask any majority firm on this call or any place in the industry, they are very selective about who they bid against, because over time they have learned and they figured out, particularly if they're all using 80 to 90% of the same subcontractors, the only thing they have to be concerned about are their overheads and profits, unless their subcontractors are giving them all different prices. There's a game that's being played out there as well. Now, if I'm doing work with XYZ subcontractor and they do a bulk of their work with me, and now a new company jumps into the mix and they ask for a bid from my subcontractor that I've been feeding for 50 years, he probably won't give them the same number that he's giving me. Those things happen. And until minorities get enough time in grade to figure it out, to become competitive by bringing us in and out periodically and sporadically, we can never get our footing to be competitive.
There's a follow-up here, and could you speak about one of the best experiences you had working collaboratively with majority partners where you both grew and profited? Sometimes people need a little inspiration.
Well, I'm still here. So that's one testament. I think that the partnership that I've had, partnerships, chemistry is unfortunate, and I hate using this analogy, it's like a good marriage or whatever else. I mean, it may start out, rocky, or it may start out great, and it may be rocky in the middle, make it better, make it worse, whatever, but it's got to be mutual respect. And so I try not to partner with people in a joint venture that we don't have a mutual respect for one another. And when and where we've had that mutual respect, it's worked out very well. I've probably done more JVs on prime or major programs with Jacobs than anyone. But when if you all recall, Jacobs used to be Swergel, and we started out doing a joint venture with Swergel before, and we had some knockdown, drag out fights very early on with that organization. But as a result, they gained, I'd like to think, a respect for our organization. And we've continued to do JVs with them across the country. We were on a joint venture on the North Shore Connector project in Pittsburgh. We were on a joint venture with them in Dallas. We were in joint ventures with them here in St. Louis. So we've done a variety of joint ventures outside of St. Louis as well. That's one example. But HR Green, which is but it's all based on relationships. A guy named Rick Camerata, who used to be the president of Booker and Associates. I think you saw in the video presentation, Mike Wild, who was at Booker at the time. One of the first projects that Kwame did was an airport lighting job that we did at the airport as a sub to Booker. Well, when Booker was bought by Parsons Brinkerhoff, we worked with them as a major sub on the light rail project to St. Clair County. Then when the Cross County Collaborative came along, because of that relationship, we became a joint venture partner on that project. Well, we all know about the Cross County Collaborative. That didn't go so well, but that was the big lawsuit issue. But we were joint venture partners in that deal. And then as a result of that, then Rick went on to HR Green. HR Green opened up an office here. Because of my relationship, I returned the favor and we became a joint venture partner as we're the prime JV with HR Green at the airport on some pavement project. And we've been a joint venture with them for the last 10 years. All of that started from the relationship that I had with Rick Camerata at Booker and Associates 27 years ago.
Great. Doesn't look like any other questions have come in. If anyone does want to raise their hand or send in anything else, we had a little bit of time. So let me see. I guess no one else has any questions.
So let me just close by saying that my title, when I talk all the things that I talked about, when you look at the achievement gaps, you look at the wealth gap, the educational gap, all these gaps that are taking place, and when you look at all the other ethnic groups that are moving into the area that are what's happening, if the African Americans on this call don't do the things that I think it was Anika Porter or someone pointed out to improve the quality of their staff and their employees, to make themselves valuable to their particular partners. If the majority firms do not see the value that the majority firms bring, that the African-American firms bring to their organizations, then there will be no need for African-Americans in this new millennium other than for entertainment and folly. And that's why I titled it The Insignificant. It was Blacks in the new millennium, but Kelly changed it to Minority, but that's cool.
Okay. First of all, obviously, Tony, I knew that this would be a great discussion. I've known you long enough to know that, and I know a lot of people knew you too. So I appreciate everything that you've shared. It's been fantastic. I just have some quick closing remarks before everyone goes. Thank you, Charles Henson with BJC, for stepping in as our MC. He stepped up to the plate when our other MC could not make it. So thank you so much for doing that at the last minute. Tony, again, thank you for saying yes when I asked you to do this after having a great discussion with you and knowing that you'd be perfect for the diversity series, Real Talk. So I appreciate that. And then of course, our training education sponsors, in particular, Cosme Wagner for being our platinum sponsor. These sponsorships are really critical to our education. We've talked about that a lot today, and obviously we strongly believe in continuing education. The survey will be sent to you. We do want your feedback. We want to know about what else you want to talk about. We have other diversity series that we're planning and other diversity events. So please make sure that you share that information and what you thought about today. Also, social media is a powerful medium, so please share information. We are always trying to share your information as members. We do appreciate you, so make sure that you really do follow us on social media and see what's going on. And then last but not least, thank you all for participating today and being here. We do appreciate it. I know this discussion can always be a challenging one to some extent. If you're not participating on our diversity committee, we strongly suggest that you get on our diversity committee chaired by Julie Ledbetter. We have a lot of great discussions. We have a lot of work to do, as you've heard, and we keep pushing for that fight. So please join us. And that's it for today. Have a great rest of the week. Thank you so much.
Thank you.